everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Future Contracts. I have a very special guest with me today, Chrissy Wolfe, who I'm sure many of you already know. But Chrissy, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, me too. Chrissy, for those of you who don't know you, can you just give us a little intro?
Yes, sure. So I'm Chrissy Wolfe. I am a lawyer, but I wear many hats. So I'm now a partner at Nexa in clinical negligence and cosmetic injuries. I also have my own consulting business called LAB Consultancy. I also do quite a lot on social media and various other strings to my bow, including events, public speaking, writing, vlogging, all sorts of things. So yeah, all sorts of things related to the legal industry.
Amazing. Yeah, you're one of the OGs of this space, I think. I mean, I've known you since I first started, or have always heard about you, and yeah, you're just lovely to meet in person as well. And so I'm really excited about today. And as you said, you do wear many hats. But what would you describe your current mission as? What are you
So
focusing on?
yeah, so currently, as I mentioned, I am wearing many hats. So the focus is my legal practice at the moment. So I have a litigation practice with Nexa, which is a platform firm. So effectively, I run my own consultancy practice off their platform. So I'm self-employed, have an independent practice, and as is normal with the consultancy arrangements. So whatever I bring in, they take a percentage of that to effectively cover the umbrella back end things like compliance and insurance, etc. So I'm running my practice from Nexa. I've been doing that for just over a year. Really enjoying that. Before that, I was at Irwin Mitchell for about 8 years in their serious injury international team, international serious injury and clinical negligence team. So that was quite an interesting journey I had, doing all sorts of different types of weird and wonderful accidents abroad, and particularly medical tourism, sort of the cosmetic surgery side, which was just booming when I first joined the firm, or starting to boom anyway. So I sort of developed this sub niche in surgical claims, particularly cosmetic surgery, which is sort of what I've carried forward now into Nexa, alongside a host of other types of clinical negligence claims. So it's quite a broad practice. My sort of super specialism is within cosmetic and aesthetic claims. So that's sort of my primary focus at the moment, looking at expanding that practice. I'm actually hiring at the moment, which is exciting. And one of the cool things about Nexa, which is the reason why I joined Nexa over any other of the consulting platforms, is that they actually allow you to sort of build your own brand using their platform. So that is in progress, which I'm really excited about. So that's coming very soon. And sort of the premise and the mission of that brand is primarily going to focus around clinical negligence claims, but also around the healthcare system, because there are a lot of issues with the healthcare system. And yes, holding people to account is part of what improves that system. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. But there are other things that can be done around that to improve the healthcare system and sort of reduce the number of medical mistakes that we're experiencing in the UK and across other countries as well. I work internationally. So it's kind of a global mission, really, in terms of looking beyond just holding those to account and actually looking at ways that we can improve the system through campaigning, working with governments, also through technology. That's a huge aspect of what I'm doing at the moment, sort of twofold aspects of technology. One, how we can use technology to improve the healthcare system. Also, secondly, how we can use technology to improve the legal practice from the point of view of driving better value for clients, but also a better working environment and just a more enjoyable job for the team I want to build, to get rid of a lot of that legwork, and actually so we can really focus on kind of what we're passionate about and making a difference and helping clients and really being that value add rather than just doing a lot of the legwork behind the scenes. So huge kind of emphasis on technology at the moment and looking at how that can really make a difference to to both employee and client experience.
Can we talk a bit more about that? So I'm really interested in the space of firms, service providers that are using technology to improve the way that they service their clients. What exactly are you doing there?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because I'm really enjoying being a startup at the moment because I have a blank canvas. really, which is great. So I'm starting my processes really for the first time, and I'm starting them from a kind of, technology first principle, because I don't have lots of staff. I don't have to kind of worry about reworking those processes and potentially kind of being too efficient and having to, redistribute people. It's much easier and much more fun actually coming at it from let's start from this, rather than let's having to unpick everything and redesign it. So I'm really looking at fundamentally where the best use of the human value is versus the technology value. So for me, because my clients are in most cases very severely injured and quite often psychologically traumatized, my best use of my time is actually spending time with them and actually doing that side of it. And clients do want that. They do want that support and they do want that relationship, because they're dealing with physical and emotional trauma, which is quite niche, which is not the case with all legal practices and all sectors. But with my sector, there's a real kind of need for the human element on that side of things. And also because a lot of them are not necessarily sophisticated users of legal services. I'm not dealing with businesses here. I'm dealing with people in their personal capacity. Actually, they're not as familiar with what goes on behind the scenes, and then don't necessarily need to know as much of that side of things. They're more interested in the kind of human connection. So I'm trying to use my time to focus mainly on that side of things and actually be as efficient as I can kind of behind the scenes, taking care of that side of things, to the operational side, so that really I'm making the best use of my time by being in person with the clients. And because I'm a sole founder at the moment, actually I want to be as efficient as possible, because I want to free up my time. I don't have lots of staff to delegate to, so I have quite a big pressure to be efficient. It's be efficient or lose business, lose money, lose clients effectively. So it's not a choice for me at the moment. It's something that I was really fortunate that when I launched the brand, I had a lot of inquiries and a lot of clients very quickly. So I actually had to find a way to serve those clients efficiently, without having a huge kind of staff, without having a huge workforce. So that kind of forced me into a position to look at how I can be as efficient as possible and actually kind of do things I needed to do to grow the business without having to go on a massive hiring spree, which I haven't done. So I mean, obviously, it's quite a niche area of law. So I don't do loads and loads of contract review, for example. What I do is quite a lot of drafting of documents. So actually, I'm using processes now where a lot of those processes are fundamentally automated. So actually kind of drafting the documents that I need to draft. I have templates for a lot of those now, which are automatically drafted. So I can now just go in and literally just look over them and amend the details that I need to amend, rather than drafting from scratch. So that was a huge part of the process, which took a lot of time. And actually, I've worked with, we use a Leap case management system at Nexa. I've previously been a real big fan of Clio, and I love Clio as well. And that's actually the kind of one that I wanted. But with Nexa, they were using Leap, so I've learned to use Leap. And actually, Leap is also a really good system. And they've got a system called LawY, which is pretty good for document drafting, which is really helpful. So I've been doing a lot of that behind the scenes, really kind of putting off hiring for as long as I've needed to. I'm now in a position where I do want to hire somebody, because actually that human element now does need to be spread across multiple people, because that still requires my in-person time. And actually I'm at a point now where I do need to share that responsibility with someone else. But actually it's not so much the behind the scenes work that needs the extra person. It's the actual kind of client facing work, which I still think for my area of law is so important. And I think that's really going to be the key to any business, is getting that human to technology ratio right. And I think that's going to be different for every single client in every single sector, because some clients really don't want to deal with the lawyer. They just want it all to get done behind the scenes. And, they feel like it's taken up too much of their time to be dealing with the lawyer in person. Other clients are the opposite end of the spectrum and actually want that reassurance and want that touch point and that human connection. So it's never going to be a one size fits all approach. I think, I've taken the view that my clients really benefit from a lot of human contact time, and that's where I want to add the most value, and that's where the sort of humans in my business are going to come into their own. I don't need them so much for the operational side, and I don't need them for the behind the scenes work, because I'm trying to make that as efficient as possible. But what I want is great humans. And that's really the kind of most important part right now.
I love that. So in terms of kind of going about this and your approach, you've deciphered what's scalable and what's not. and then you focused on the scalable parts to automate those first and then hire for the things that are unscalable, which is a huge element of any legal profession. All right, if you're doing conveyancing, then maybe your customer doesn't really want to talk to you for ages about formalities and they just want the thing done because they consider it almost bureaucratic. But then when it comes to areas where there is that, what you're describing, you know, your area is so human and there's so much complexity around how they're dealing with what it is that's happened to them that requires your support, that you do need to deploy that human element, and that's never going to go away.
Yeah, I think that's right. And as I said, every niche is different, and every type of client is different. But I've been working with these sorts of clients for over a decade now, and they do really benefit. Particularly the sort of higher value, really catastrophically injured client, really do kind of prefer that human touch point and need that, and that is the difference between you and another firm, is if you can provide that service to them. So I think it's definitely a case by case basis. But I do have some of the opposite end of the spectrum who actually just they're quite happy to be updated by email, and they don't want to have those conversations. They're still working, they're still busy, and that's fine. So we adapt accordingly. But certainly for my area of work, I would say it leans more towards the human element from the actual sort of client facing side.
Yeah, you wrote a post on LinkedIn about the volume one humans also hallucinate, and I loved that post because it really resonated with me. Can you just talk to us a bit about the kind of the backdrop to that post and what you meant?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been so much talk about AI recently. Is it going to replace us? How dangerous is it? How much can we rely on it? And a lot of kind of scaremongering around it, which I understand. At the end of the day, law is, it's a highly regulated profession, and generally speaking, we have to be quite risk averse, but because of that, and it's regulated for a reason. I think when it comes to a lot of the things that I've seen with AI, I think that particularly the point around the hallucination was people saying that AI will never replace us because it's unreliable and it hallucinates. And I think what we're dealing with now really is we're dealing with really early stage AI, or generative AI particularly. We are in very early volumes, and actually what's to come, if we look at kind of compared to when we launched the first iPhone, for example, how quickly that's gone from the very first iPhone, where the very first app was I don't know if you remember this, it was called iBeer. I think it's called iBeer. And literally all it was you had like a full cup of beer and you tilted it and it emptied. That
Yes.
was that was the first app that there was on an iPhone. And you think of how far we've come since then, and how quickly that's evolved into what mobile phones are and what smartphones are now. That's a sort of progression, if not much quicker, that we're looking at in AI. So the fact that it currently resonates, it's not a reason to believe that it will never be as reliable as we are as lawyers in terms of our research capability and the answers that we're able to produce. So I think kind of turning a blind eye to it and saying, oh, it will never be as good, is not the right approach, because it's going to evolve. And the volume on humans is, I think that the comment I made was, as humans, when we're little, when we're young, we also hallucinate, we also say things that didn't happen, but we grow up and we become adults, and we refine and we learn. And that's exactly what's going to happen with AI. So I don't think it's right to just dismiss it on the basis that it's never going to be as reliable as our brains. I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest it will actually be more reliable without the human error side. There's a lot of human error which comes with being a human, and actually a lot of that can actually potentially be evened out by AI. So I think there's a lot of reason to suggest it may be more reliable than we are in the future. So I think there's a lot of attitudes that are kind of dismissive of its capabilities, and I don't think we're anywhere near being replaced. But I do think we need to respect its capabilities and not kind of be so in our own egos about being a lawyer that we think that we are we can't be replaced by it, because I think there's a good chance that not every single aspect of being a lawyer can be replaced, but a great deal of it can. And I think we just need to be alive to that. And it's better to get ahead of that than to be in denial around that.
Yeah, I do see some really visceral responses to AI by usually more senior lawyers, to be honest. What do you think is threatening them? Why do you think they're having this visceral response to this?
I think it's a combination of things. I mean, it's obviously rooted in a fear of, potentially what could happen and, losing their livelihoods. A lot of times senior lawyers have dedicated their entire lives to being lawyers, and actually that is their entire identity, their entire purpose. And actually something that threatens to potentially take that away or change that is naturally going to spark fear. And I think there is also some ego around it as well, in terms of, how a lot of lawyers think, how much we've had to study, how much we've had to learn. And actually, no machine could ever possibly replace my brain and everything that I've done to achieve the status I've achieved. Uh, and I think that's not necessarily, the best way to look at it, in terms of those aren't really the facts of the situation. Both of those things come from emotion, really, rather than looking at the logical capabilities of what this tool can do and actually what clients want from lawyers. There was the great quote from Richard Susskind years ago, which is, what clients really want is solutions to problems. And currently lawyers are the best way we have to get to those solutions. But that's not to say that we always will be. Fundamentally, we are often a middleman between client and solution. And I think what AI has the capacity to do is take out a lot of middlemen. And sometimes, and a lot of the time, we should be adding value. And I think, frankly, if we are adding value, that's where we're not going to be replaced, but it's where we are just acting as that middleman and we're not actually adding additional value. That's where the problems potentially arise.
Yeah, I mean, how much of a barrier to the adoption of new ways of working do you think the fact that lawyers identify as lawyers um, play? What kind of role do you think that plays? Because if you're doing marketing, you don't necessarily identify as that,
Mm.
make it an intrinsic part of your identity and who you are. So there are some other professions that I can think of that are like that, like doctors, for example. They might really associate their self-worth and their value with being a doctor. Same with lawyers. How problematic?
Mm. It's a really good point, actually, and I think you're absolutely right. I think comparing it to something like marketing, where effectively your job is to market a business, so actually whatever is the most effective way to do that is the way that you do that. If it's using AI tools, etc., because your job is to provide that service. But you're right, we have this identity where we're not just providing a service; we are that service. That is our core being, and I think that's where potentially it is then difficult to start looking at how we do things differently, because we're so used to being kind of the most fundamental. We are used to being the fundamental person in that process, so we can't see outside of that. We can't look at the process without the person. And I think actually we have to be able to do that. We have to be able to take ourselves outside of it and say, this is the service we are providing, how can we do that better, rather than looking at how do we make ourselves better, or how do we have to take ourselves out of that and look at what we're actually doing. And I think that's where AI first firms, that's where they're different, and they really are doing that. They're looking at the solution, the problem first, and actually saying, if we have to step out of that process entirely, fine. That's really the difference between having an AI first mindset and an AI first business and an AI enabled business. And actually, a lot of law firms are looking to do, or are doing, is effectively akin to being AI enabled. They are using AI to make existing processes more efficient, rather than actually change processes and actually change the delivery model from scratch. And I think fundamentally, it's the firms that are going to be able to do that, completely change how they deliver services, which are going to really excel in certain sectors. It's not that, there's not a one size fits all approach, but I think that's fundamental difference between being AI first and AI enabled.
Yes, yes, I love that answer. And you've been quite outspoken about the barriers that the younger generations, or Gen Z, or even now Gen Alpha, as they come into the workforce, and how they face barriers when they're trying to get into a profession that just does not evolve quickly enough.
Mm.
What are they telling you that they need that firms just are not providing?
It's a big issue, and I think it's not specific things. It's fundamentally the issue with the legal profession is it's kind of steeped in elitism, and it's been so defined in this hierarchy. And actually how the legal profession works is, it's incredibly difficult to get into. I'm perceived as this kind of this sort of unattainable thing to become a lawyer, which then sort of creates this pressure for young people around how they go, creates this scarcity mindset, which again sort of creates this tension among young people. It's also kind of, it's the way the legal profession is marketed is that, it's elitist. It's for the absolute best of the best, and particularly kind of the barrister's profession. When we look at the people that are in that profession, still, it's really lacking in diversity, and it's still a very much an elitist profession, or at least that's how it looks from the outside. And I think a lot of that creates a barrier for people who want to access it, because first of all, they think, well, I'm never going to be good enough to access that, and then that's proven by looking at how difficult it is to secure entry into the profession. And then it's seen by, like, let's look at people who were at the top of the profession, and actually that's not very diverse either really at the top level. And actually, that all of those things really act as kind of deterrents for young people who want to pursue a career in that. Historically, I think previous generations, our generations, kind of saw that as a challenge and saw that as something to aim for. Look at we want to be there, we want to be them, we want to prove that we can do this. And actually, in our generation, the perils of that were not really spoken about. We just saw people in these positions, but we never heard their stories. We didn't hear about mental health. We didn't hear about the impacts on their lives. And actually, we just saw this as the kind of, crowning glory that we want to aim for. But I think the difference with this generation is they now kind of know the raw facts of that. There's people talking openly about mental health. There's people online, myself included, saying actually it's really not worth sacrificing your life for this. And I think that's really, and the data around that, which is now far more accessible to this generation coming through because they're digital natives and they have all this information that we didn't have. That's really putting people off, I think. When they look at the stats from Law Care, they've put together a lot of stats on mental health. And actually, when you've got people actually putting together the numbers and, how it really looks on paper, you're getting paid this much, but actually you're, all of your time is taken up with this job and you have no time to spend that money. And actually, really, it's not the best way, because now there's 25 million ways you can make 100K a year, because that's the essence of kind of the internet, of like, e-commerce, etc. There's so many different ways that you can make money now. Whereas we didn't have any of that. We had, these are the professions, be a lawyer, be a doctor, be an accountant. We didn't have any of these other options. Those were considered the best. I'm probably showing my age a bit here, but but those were considered, those were the good professions, and those are the ones that earn the money. Whereas now, absolutely, it's not, being a lawyer is not the way to earn the most amount of money necessarily. When you break down the figures, instead of, launching a tech business, or, there are so many ways that you can make that money that are far more attractive in terms of work-life balance and stress, etc. That now I think it's, that's really starting to break through. That sort of illusion of this being where you want to aim for, on the top of the top profession, is now breaking down. And I think really law firms can't rely on that anymore. They can't rely on that kind of overwhelming popularity that they've historically had as being like, everybody wants to be a lawyer because it's such a prestigious profession. This generation just aren't really as focused, and that this is a generalization, but they're not as focused on the prestige. They're not as focused on, this is a prestigious profession to be a part of. They're much more focused on the practicalities and the reality of life and what that job entails. And we're seeing that they are voting with their feet on that, in terms of the fact that that they're not standing for that we've seen huge amounts of resignations, particularly among kind of the more junior generation. People who don't want to be lawyers. I think, I can't remember what the percentage was, but a large percentage of people who wanted to be lawyers didn't want to be managers. They don't want that responsibility, which is insane to us, because our pinnacle was absolutely want to climb the ladder, get to the top. But actually, a lot of juniors who do want to be lawyers don't want to get to the top. Actually, they just want to do it. They want to learn the skills. They want to enjoy it. And then they either just want to stay as lawyers, or they want to get out and do something else. There's not this kind of climb to reach partnership like there was in our generation, where we just saw that as the shining light. And I actually think that's great. I think that's great that they're looking at the realities of it, and they're looking at the numbers, and they're looking at the stats around mental health, and they're looking at how that how that salary actually breaks down in real life. And I think that's great. We just didn't do that. We just didn't have that information. We just kind of accepted what we were told. But I think law firms are going to have to change. They're really going to have to offer something more than that now, which I think is a positive thing.
Yeah, and you've called out firms banning AI in training contract applications. What kind of message does that send to these people? So it's not just about work-life balance, it's also the work environment and how alien it is to a person who manages their whole life on their phone with a few clicks.
Yeah, it's interesting because yeah, I mean, I've seen firms who effectively say you're not allowed to use AI in your training contract applications, and that's bizarre to me because AI is going to be a hugely relevant skill, and I don't think any law firm really denies that, given where we are now, that it's going to be a hugely relevant skill, and actually allowing students to use that as part of their application, you are effectively testing that skill. It should be tested the same way as anything else. If you use AI badly, it's exactly the same way as using anything else badly. If you copy and paste your cover letter from ChatGPT, it's exactly the same as copying and pasting your application form with the wrong firm name on it, and you will be downgraded in exactly the same way. I'm seeing it now. I'm advertising for a job at the moment, and I can absolutely see when they've copied and pasted from ChatGPT. I don't mind because I'm testing them, and for me it shows who they are. So it's an easy way for me to say, okay, that's not what I want. And I think law firms should look at it the same way and say, if you've actually got a candidate, if you're allowing candidates to use AI, you can really see the ones who are using it well because it will be virtually undetectable, and the ones who aren't. And actually, that should be part of your criteria realistically because it's an important skill to have. So, I see it as you should absolutely use it and use it as part of your criteria.
Mm. Yeah, agree. Like take the M dashes out, for example, because no one uses them and it feels unnatural and it feels AI. But and that's not just to say do it performatively. Make sure that your communication is relatable to the other person who is consuming that. And if you don't understand the importance of that, or you don't understand how to use AI in the right way, then that's an insight into that person's capabilities and their suitability for your firm. Because when they come into your firm, you can't, or maybe some still are doing this, but they're not going to say never use AI. You want them to use AI.
Yeah. Exactly. And actually testing that they can already use it well on their application forms is a great starting point. Because actually, if you don't know, then actually the first experience they have, they're going to copy and paste something into a client letter that's going to look like that. So actually, you'd rather test people's abilities and actually know that they've already refined that skill and they know how to use it and they know how to generate a template and then amend that template with their own experience and their own voice and their own research. That's a really important skill, the same way as drafting any cover letter would be. So I think it's a really good test to actually let people use it and showcase how well or not well they can.
Yeah, yes. How do you think firms need to rethink readiness when it comes to assessing junior talent, especially in a world that is going to be very AI powered? Are they not key to their future because they come armed with this? To your point, they're digital natives. So, don't we want to hone that and bring it forward into our firms?
Totally, totally. I mean, I think readiness. I think firms really have to look at skills rather than experience. I mean, I think experience is one thing, but actually experience in an environment which is going to be, very dissimilar to the environment that they're actually going to be working moving forward. Because actually, frankly, a lot, if they've had experience in any kind of traditional law firm, it's actually probably going to be quite different to how law firms are going to operate in the future. But I think actually recruiting for kind of skills and talents in terms of, adaptability, agility, curiosity, those are going to be really, really important because I think the junior generation are going to be vital in real transformation. I was listening to, actually, I was watching a TikTok video the other day with Rory Sutherland. You know who Rory Sutherland is? And he was talking about an analogy about how much people value autonomy. And he talked about the fact that he booked a hotel room recently in America. And when he went onto the booking page looked completely different to other hotels in terms of it actually had the opportunity to option to book whether you wanted a room that was near to the swimming pool or near to the gym, for example, and how that was a complete rethink on the traditional page. And they were charging a premium for those things, which they never could have charged a premium for before. Well, they never have charged a premium for before because it's just your standard, basic, deluxe, etc. But no one ever thought to do that. And, I really thought that is why Gen Z is so necessary in law firms, because actually, as lawyers, to use that metaphor, we only see the room page the way we've always seen it. We only see, there are so many processes when we've been working for 5, 10, 15 years. There are certain processes which are so ingrained that we can't see that they are even part of the transformation process because they're not in our consciousness as something that needs changing. A booking page, if you were to start a hotel tomorrow and look at your booking page, you would just would construct it the same way as you've constructed every other booking page. You might think of some things that might be different. Maybe your branding's different, maybe your marketing's different, because those are things that are in our consciousness as things that need transforming. But there's so many processes that are not in our consciousness because they are so ingrained that we wouldn't even look to change them. And I think that's why Gen Z are so vital, because they don't have those ingrained processes. They haven't seen 100,000 booking pages. They're looking at this process brand new from scratch. And they have this ability to say, actually, why wouldn't we construct it like this? Which is so valuable, and it's going to be so vital, really, when we're really looking at changing these processes from day one, because they don't have that ingrained knowledge. They haven't seen 100 versions of this that are all the same. They're just starting and saying, why don't we do it like this? And I think that's going to be so necessary, and they really need to have a voice in that process, rather than a typical system where they don't get a voice until they're applying for partner or something. And that's a real missed opportunity to not have your Gen Z cohort really, really intrinsically involved in your transformation process, because they have the power to see things that we just cannot see.
Yeah. And what would your advice be to Gen Z who are trying to get into this space? How can they leverage that advantage that they've got, and how do they showcase it?
I mean, I think there's plenty of opportunity to do that. I mean, I often get, well, not often, but sometimes get messages from students who have looked at something that I'm doing and actually just offered a better way of doing it. And it's really, really impressed me. And, I've thought, great, actually, you know what, when I've got a job, I want to hire you, because that's exactly what I want someone to do. And I think you've got opportunities to do that within your application forms. You've also got opportunities just whenever you like to write to someone senior and say, look, I've seen what you're doing, and actually I think this would be great, and actually really make your voice known. I mean, the possibilities are endless. It is a process driven process in terms of applying for jobs, but there are endless ways to stand out in that process. And actually really communicating your view. You can communicate them online, you can communicate them in messages. Actually, really, if you do have that unique viewpoint and you do have that unique insight, don't wait for an application form to show that. Feel free to show that any way that you want, and don't necessarily, if you've got a cover letter opportunity, you can put whatever you like in there. And actually, if you've got that skill, showcase it. And actually, if it lands in front of the right person, it will get noticed. And if it doesn't, then it's the wrong business for you. Keep trying. If that doesn't get noticed, then it's because you're not in the right environment to be noticed. And that is really important as well, because you need to be in the right firm. You can have all of the right, you can be the right package at the wrong door, frankly. And there's a lot of wrong doors in law at the moment if you are really creative like that. So don't be put off by that. Just keep going until you find the firm that listens to you, because you will be really, really valued in the right organisation.
And what about when they're in? How do they stand out when they're in an organisation? What can they do to add value from the outset in a way that others maybe can't?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is actually learning, first of all, being a bit of a sponge at the beginning, and actually learning about the right way to go about it, because there are different ways of going about things in different firms. There are different ways to be heard. And actually, I mean, I would always recommend speaking to as many people as you can, senior people, even if it's not in your department. There's no reason why you can't arrange meetings with partners in a different department. Do your research around people in the firm who you think share your views, based on their profiles, based on their LinkedIn, based on their internet profiles, and seek them out and speak to them. Because that is eventually how I, made my way at IM. I eventually found somebody who actually really aligned with my views, who was senior, but it took me about 5 years to do that. Because I actually, was kind of looking kind of within the, the departments that I was in, and actually turned out it was the CTO, somebody who I didn't even really think to contact. But yeah, so I think really, research how the firm works, research the people who you think you will be aligned with, and regardless of how senior they are, just arrange a meeting. They can only say no, or it can only not go in your favor. That's the worst case scenario. If you're doing a good job, it's not going to affect your progression opportunity, provided you go about it in the right way. So, there is no harm in just reaching out to as many people and finding allies. Finding allies within the firm is really, really important. You won't always find them in your immediate team. So I think really kind of making the effort to get to know people in your wider firm, and finding those allies is super important.
Yeah, and I think that applies not just to Gen Zs going into new jobs. I think it applies to anybody that's going into a new role, how you would go about making your mark in a business. Um, and you've built a really impressive online brand, and you've got a lot of people that kind of look up to you and listen to you. And how has that helped you in your career, would you say?
Massively. I mean, I think having the network and the brand has been kind of instrumental to my career trajectory in a way that I never predicted. I started a YouTube channel back in 2017, and it was nothing to do with my career. Social media wasn't really back then. It wasn't really a tool that anyone recognized as a marketing tool or a tool to help you with your career. It was purely, again, a kind of a necessity start, because I had a really difficult time getting through the process. I'm kind of an unusual background, and as soon as I did, I really wanted to mentor other people, and I got to a stage where I was mentoring like 3 or 4 people, and I just felt that I couldn't give any more, because alongside working, and I thought, how am I going to do it? How can I mentor more people without giving up kind of more hours of my time? And my friend was she was a YouTuber, and she vlogged about Disney and beauty and all sorts of things, but she had like 30,000 subscribers or something on YouTube. And like I was watching her do these videos, and I thought, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could actually like mentor online. It's a completely free resource. It's totally accessible to anybody. You don't have to be able to afford it, which was exactly the premise that I wanted. I wanted it to be completely accessible. I thought, well, why don't I just try? There was nothing like it online at all at that point. So I just thought, what's the harm if it helps, a handful of people? That's, I'm already doing more than I am now, and it's giving up a couple of hours a week to shoot video. So anyway, that's how it started. And then what followed obviously out of that was then awards and publications and loads of things. And now I've got a following of kind of over 150,000, which is wild. And the doors that opened for me later on, which I had no idea of at the time, what followed then, was, people offering me partnership when I was only like 3 or 4 years qualified, and, all of this stuff. And it was just insane at that point. And then when I later went on to launch my own business, it was, the help that network gave me was incredible. People that I had helped in the past and referred work for, they helped me set up. I've got kind of like an unofficial board of directors, whenever I need it, because I've built that network of people that I've supported in the past. So actually just having that network of people, I don't think I ever would have been able to start my own business without it, because I've just got such, I've got such a big group of people to call from, and, to get advice from and to support. And obviously then the following as well, helps to generate leads. I mean, that's pretty much my biggest source of lead gen is my online profile. Word of mouth and online profile are my 2 biggest sources of lead gen. So it's been instrumental in building the business as well, and actually being able to be independent from a firm, because otherwise, I much prefer being independent than as part of a firm. But actually, it's a very difficult thing to do, to be able to generate enough of your own leads to actually gain that independence. And the online profile is what helped me to do that. So it's been really, really instrumental for me.
How incredible. I love that story. Amazing. How far you've come, and just taking a leap, trying something different and trying to put stuff out there that's of value. I think that's really key. Trying to not just content for the sake of it, but content that adds value to people is something that you've done really well from the outset. And I've always admired you for. And yeah, can totally see how that's had a huge influence in how you've progressed now.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I think, in an arena where we are very precedent driven, I think you have to sometimes just take a leap of faith and say there isn't a precedent for this, but I see the value in it. And if there's value, then it should work, even if there's no precedent for it, which is very anti-lawyer to say that. But actually, it's something, and I think actually being a junior lawyer then helped me, because I didn't have as many precedents. I wasn't kind of ingrained in, well, I must follow in someone else's footsteps. If no one else has done it, it must be too risky. I hadn't developed that yet. I think as I've got older, I potentially have developed it a little bit more, but then I just hadn't. I just didn't. I wasn't ingrained in those processes, and that was a real value to me, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're more rebellious when you're younger. So I think
Mm.
it's a huge advantage for anyone who's younger and entering the profession, because they shouldn't be afraid of that rebellious streak. They should embrace it and just go with it. And it also helps you think totally differently, to your point, to anyone else who has that precedent and that structure in their minds of what's acceptable and what's not. Yeah, excellent. So if you could If you could rewrite one part of the Gen Z career path for them, what would you start with?
Well, that's a great question. I think it would be greater responsibility earlier, because I think there's a tendency in the legal profession to say, okay, well, juniors are at the bottom and seniors are at the top. But actually, that's in terms of experience in law, is what we're talking about there. But realistically, Gen Z have far superior experience and knowledge in technology, data processing, marketing, social media, all of those things. So they shouldn't be considered junior, really, overall in the business. Perhaps they're junior in terms of their legal experience, but they should be very senior, actually, in respect of those aspects of the business, which are vital, really, in this period that we're going through now in terms of transformation. So I think one part of the process I would be to look at Gen Z as, yes, juniors as lawyers, but seniors in terms of the other aspects that they can really add value in, and to treat them appropriately, both with bearing both of those things in mind.
Yes, thank you. That's a really good tip, I think. And it is hard because it's quite a hierarchical culture, isn't it, within law firms? So it's going to be hard to make that change. But I think it's going to start to happen. And I had a friend actually that messaged me recently. He is in a very old industry and he's trying to influence them and get them to adopt AI and understand the benefits of it. And he does contract work. He's not a lawyer, but he does contract work. And um, even though he's kind of mid-level in his career, the influence he's now having in these really senior circles, because he's bringing input, he's providing input from a realm that they're not that familiar with and that they may be a little bit worried about or scared of. And I think that's really it. I think to make your mark, you need to bring something that's fresh and different and to not be afraid of it. And then, of course, if you've got a leadership team that supports that and you're mindful of what type of organization you're going into and you're seeing those signs early on, then it just gives you such a good footing for the rest of your career. Um, yeah, Chrissy, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today. Thank you so much for joining us. And for anyone who listened in today, please stay tuned. There's more to come. And thank you once again, Chrissy.
Thank you. Nice to speak to you.
And you. Take care.